Welcome, Craig. It's good to have you on board.
Thanks.
And Zach, hey there.
Hi.
How are
It's
you?
very good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
As set up by my father, I am my father's son. My name is Zach. And just briefly kind of where I'm coming from in my life and the path I was on. Growing up with a father like Craig, like you just heard, and growing up with a extremely intelligent and pragmatic mother, um, I I just felt very free to be able to explore who exactly I was and not have things kind of forced upon me. And so on that journey at a very early age, I started devouring quantum physics books, books on consciousness. Sydney Banks, I've seen him probably 6, 7 times live, starting at around that age. And the main impetus for me going into my full discovery of the three principles was that my father had always kind of displayed the qualities of that, but he had never outwardly said, you need to know these things, you need to learn this. And it was actually my brother who had committed a small crime, which he was mandated by a court to do an anger management class, and he went to my dad thinking he could get out of it very easily by saying, well, can I go to one of your three principles conference things, and that'll count as my anger management class? And my dad said, sure, but you have to do it for me to sign off on it. And so at this point in my brother's life, he was very confrontational with my dad. They didn't get along too well because he was very rebellious. He was at that stage in his life. And he goes to this conference that my dad does and comes back, and he looks at me and he goes, Dad, I thought that was going to be something that it really wasn't. He goes, Dad really knows what he's talking about. And I'm like, what? And he's like, it changed my life. And I'm like, are you serious? And so I said, I got to figure out what changed your, because Sam was just not in that avenue. And so I went and I learned basically a vocabulary around what I had always kind of felt and known and seen displayed in front of me, which was really valuable. And it helped me propel forward in my life in much healthier and more positive ways. And it helped me gain and glean a really good articulation of existence. And I knew it could profoundly help people. And so it was one of the tools in my tool bag, so to speak, because it really does explain everything. But you can't just jump right into explaining everything for people. Sometimes you have to maneuver around it. And so, but I was always aware of an evolutionary drive in myself that settling for a certain amount of information or understanding was never enough for me. I always knew there was more, that this entire thing called life has a directionality to it, that it is going somewhere. And so I surrendered to that and kept looking for more and more and more. It's like this beautiful thirst that when it gets quenched, you find a whole new thirst that you never knew about after that. And that's, I've realized that's the very thing that makes us alive. And so that led me on the path to find higher brain living, and that profoundly changed my life and actually gave me and this is going to sound funky and we can talk about it, a true understanding of what Sid Banks meant by the three principles and what he labeled them as: mind, consciousness, and thought. Prior to an experience I had with higher brain living, I had formulated a feeling and an idea of what I thought those three things meant. But then I had an experience where I tangibly accessed that formless dimension of ourselves, and it changed the rules of the game and the definitions for me of those things. And so now we're here and having this wonderful interview.
And I'm in the background as I'm thinking this, I'm thinking too of that evolutionary drive, that something in us that seems to want to continue to learn and wake up and grow. So I thought we might look at what changed or unfolded for you, Zach, when you heard Sid, and then take the next step, what changed and unfolded for you when you had the higher brain living experience? Does that sound like a plan?
Sure.
Great. So tell us about hearing Sid and what shifted or opened up for you when you heard Sid.
Sure. Well, when I started listening to Sid, it was back in the days of tape. And so my dad had a lot and still has a lot of tapes of Sid. In fact, he probably has the largest collection on earth, I swear. And what I first noticed is his thick accent. Yeah. And the way that he talked. He had this uncanny ability to put you in the quiet mind state just by him talking. And what I was first aware of is that most people are not in a quiet mind state. And when they are close to that quiet mind state, the only thing they've ever associated it with is falling asleep. Because there's no chatter, and the only time there's really no chatter is right before we drift off to sleep. And so that level of quiet mind, that really actual quiet mind, most people associate with sleep, and so did I. And so when I started hearing Sid, I would literally start to fall asleep in the crowd or fall asleep listening to the tapes, which I bet is a lot of other people feel the same way.
Yeah, I have heard that from other people.
Right, and it's because I just came to realize that the quiet mind state, just because I associate it with sleep does not mean I have to fall asleep while in that experience in that state. We can cultivate a level of conscious awareness and, in fact, high states of conscious awareness in that state. And so that's where it really shifted for me. And hearing him talk, you know how it is when you hear anybody talk about the three principles. They're kind of beating around a bush. And it's like they're circling a truth, a formless truth, that they can't necessarily say directly or point at directly, but they're doing their best to tighten that circle around that formless truth. And so I realized that, and so I just investigated that further in my own life. And as I did, it just began to change everything. Your interaction with other people, your interaction with yourself and your own thinking. And it just puts you in just much more positive states. But the one thing behind it all is that I always was aware that no matter how much understanding I gleaned or how much truth and contentment and peace that I attained, there was always something in me, a spark, a fire that said, this is awesome, but there's always more. There's always more. And so that's what led me to not only stay with the three principles and deepen my understanding of that, but start looking for other things that were available in the world as well. And in fact, if there was a possibility of me plugging any of these things in as a full-time career to feed me not only intellectually but at my soul level and at my formless dimension self, that's what I wanted to do. And so that led me down a path of discovering higher brain living.
Okay.
I'm a three principles pioneer. I mean, I'm published in professional journals. This is the basis of my life and my work since I found out about it. And I'm not looking to add anything, but when across my radar came higher brain living, there was something about it that captured my attention and spoke to that spark in me that said, pay attention. So I did. I've learned to be attuned to that and honor that. So I did. I thought, there's something different about this. And when I went and heard about it, not only was it philosophically completely in alignment with the three principles, but it had this amazing physiological technique that shifts the brain's physiology, opens that channel that correlates with higher consciousness, and it just physiologically opens it. So I went, and Zak was supposed to go to that with me, but work got in the way, so he wasn't there. I come out after that meeting, and the first thing I do is I get on the phone to him, and I said, what I just saw is amazing. You've got to see this. And he goes, what is it? And I said, I can't explain it. And he goes, try. So apparently I went on for 10 minutes, but he says in the first 2 minutes he got it and was interested, and then just had to endure me going on for 8 more minutes. But and then he acted on the spark there, and I suppose Zach could take it from there if there's more to the story, but I just wanted to bring in how that spark works in our lives. I've never, on the one hand, I felt like preserving the integrity of the three principles is absolutely essential, but also understanding in reality the integrity of the three principles is not just language or quote-unquote understandings. Those can evolve and be open, so true mind, true ultimate intelligence can bring all kinds of gifts into your life on all kinds of levels, and be open to it, even if it's going to turn your thinking upside down. Be open to it, because it's mind's gift to you and your gift to yourself.
Well, so what happened is I was having a higher brain living session in a room with a lot of other people having this type of higher brain living session at the training itself. And I'm not going to go into the details of the tangible aspects of what was happening, but I came to a crossroads internally in my mind that was being facilitated by a new part of my brain turning on, where I had to choose to go to the part of my mind, or personal mind I now know, that was screaming for me to stay with it, or I had to fully surrender and turn my attention to a much quieter but much stronger voice that was that formless dimension informing innate wisdom part of myself at a level I had never experienced, quite honestly. And what I did is I made a cognitive decision to turn all of my consciousness to the voice of the innate wisdom, which plunged me into a formless dimension experience that I literally cannot explain because words are form. And I was in this place for what seemed like a quite extended period of time, and when I came back to the material world, I had a level of knowledge and understanding that I could never have dreamed of in 1,000 lifetimes. And so the issue with coming back to the world of form was that all of that knowledge and understanding is inherently formless. And in order to create thinking or a thought or an idea about it or communication about it, you have to somehow fit formless dimension experience down and distill it down into a thought, and then thinking, and then an idea, and then communication, which I found very challenging quite quickly. And in fact, I sat there without being able to communicate for 45 minutes to an hour. And then my dad said, you know, think about it in terms of the three principles, or something to that effect, or how would sit, like, is it something about sit? And I went, all of the language of the three principles immediately flooded into my experience in that moment, and it gave me all of the language I needed to be able to explain something that utterly cannot be explained. And it was, and in fact, as I've looked back into Sid's work and his talks and stuff, it was Sid's earlier stuff that I was much more resonating with, when he was talking about thought being all things, not just the thought being in your thought is literally all things, all. When he says all, he means all. All things that are of the material world, thought, feeling, emotion, the material world in front of me, it's all thought, and he said that. And another thing he said is God. What is God in motion. And when you accept what is, you're accepting God. And so the most accurate description of the place I went is the word is. there is an eternal isness that is the base of every single person and all of existence. There is an isness that has no beginning and no end, and it's infinitely, in fact, the word infinite is confining for what that space really is. And it's this powerfully strong isness that has this infinite level of wisdom and intelligence. And what I realized, and I'm just going to kind of go through real quickly the revelations that I had that can change people's lives. I realized that when Sid said it's all thought, when I had the experience of this place, I realized it's literally all thought. And so thought in your mind is the actual first catalyst to have the world of form be in existence. And so very quickly I started going through every single thing I had ever held dear in thought. Any idea, any system of thinking, any feeling that was attached to my thinking around that specific subject or definition. And I'll give you an example. The word love. I had cultivated my entire life through experience and through deduction and reasoning what I thought love was. And I had attached feelings to it and definitions to it, and I thought I really knew what love was. Well, then I have this experience, and I come back, and not only is my entire lifetime of content around that word not true, but it's actually irrelevant to the true understanding and experience of love. And so what that did for me is it was extremely confronting, but at the same time extremely freeing, because I realized there's a quote in the Bible where he says, God says, "Thou shalt put no false idol, thou shalt not worship a false idol." I realized that every single thing in the world of form, including our feelings and our thinking, that we've cultivated over time is nothing but a false idol that we've been worshiping by giving conscious attention to it. And that the actual truth is behind what we've labeled as the definition or the... And so for me, the most confronting part was realizing that everything I had cultivated prior to that experience was not only not true, but it was totally irrelevant to the grand scheme, truth, and knowledge of that experience. And so it was so freeing for me to be able to move into a space where I can, the way I describe it is that your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings are all castles in the sand. And it doesn't mean that building castles in the sand doesn't have profound meaning and purpose, because it does.
Right.
But always seating yourself and knowing that it's all castles in the sand and eventually the tide will wash it away. It allows you to approach life in a completely different space. The other thing beyond that that I realized is we have this idea of God, and everybody has attached words to what God means and given him a voice or her a voice or a feeling or something, right? And various things have been used to describe that. And I had always cultivated this idea of what I thought if God were to speak to me, what that would sound or feel like, and of course you think it would be very, very apparent, and you would know it immediately, right? God is speaking to me. Well, what I realized that there's an informing nature. Now let's think about that word, information, formed from within. There is an informing mind that is the base of all things formless and formed. Now, the personal mind lives in the world of form. It is not in the formless dimension. And so when I turned my attention to that other voice and plunged into that experience, I had the revelation that that voice that was now informing me, and the reason I knew it was mind was because tangible or material world didn't exist. It came the same way my personal thought did, and it felt almost identical to my personal thought. But because the material world did not exist in any way, shape, or form, I knew that it was formless dimension mind. Because if it was any thought, the formed world would exist because thought is form. So there would be form to it, and there was no form. So what I realized and what I know now is we all have constant access to mind, or the formless dimension wisdom. And one of the errors I had made, which now it seems so obvious, that formless dimension, or what I'll call for me, God, speaks to me constantly in my mind. It comes the same way thought does, and it speaks to me in my voice. And so I now know I constantly have access to, and there's a river of innate knowing and wisdom flowing through my mind at all times. I just mistakenly thought it would be very different than my personal thought, and it is in many ways because it's informed. But the personal mind, it has the same tone, the same voice, and it feels the same way. Almost. There's a subtle difference, and that's what Sid meant by you're searching for a feeling.
This is a way that we're able to reach people with an amazing gift, and we're teaching the 3 principles through it. I've taught the 3 principles at facilitator training the last 2 years for the facilitators, and they totally love it.